Today, we take you to a place like no other, the Everest region. The terrain of the mighty Khumbu is a prime example of how unknown we are to what Mother Earth has to offer. Nepal is home to 8 of the 10 highest mountains in the world. Most importantly, this tiny, beautiful country is host to the most outrageous creation by the gods, the Everest. We took this trip in February of 2021. Like the entire world, Nepal was also going through a strict lockdown due to the COVID pandemic. During this time, the government of Nepal allowed domestic travel in February as the first wave had calmed down to some extent. We did not think twice. We packed our bags and off we went. We start our journey from the capital of Nepal, Kathmandu. The easiest and most preferred way to enter the Everest region is through the half-hour flight to one of the most dangerous airports in the world, Lukla Airport. There are alternative ways to reach Lukla, but as dangerous as it feels, the view when you are up there is to die for. The flights start taking off as early as 6 in the morning until noon. Make sure to select a day with the clearest weather for a safer and more convenient flight experience, as flight cancellations in this region happens more often than you think. Some of us in our group had never traveled by air. As scary as it was knowing the reputation of Lukla Airport, once we were in the air, the panoramic mountain view and the surreal change in vegetation from Kathmandu to Lukla was something we never knew we needed to experience in our lifetime. The further you go from Kathmandu city and the closer you get to the Everest region, the landscape starts getting rugged and serene. We approached the inclined runway of the Lukla airport, and as we landed safely, everyone rejoiced and took a breath of relief. You can immediately feel the silence and lack of chaos in the atmosphere once you are at Lukla. Exactly what you would expect after leaving Kathmandu. You are not allowed to take photos or videos while you are on the premises of the airport. We had no clue about it, so we did it anyway until we were warned by security. We were greeted by stray dogs as we entered the settlement of Lukla. By the way, the dogs in this Himalayan region are huge. I mean huge. We recommend you have some breakfast before you head towards Phakding. The trail from Lukla to Phakding is relatively easy. Phakding is a perfect place to stay overnight, following the rule of trek high and sleep low. As it was January and of course we were in the middle of a pandemic, the paved roads were very empty and not many travelers were seen there. Our first impression of Lukla was unexpected, to be precise. There were beautiful coffee shops, hotels, bars and lodges with beautiful mountain views. As you head out of Lukla, you come across a municipality office where you can fill your water bottles and use restrooms if needed. This was our first of many suspension bridges on the trek. We walked for about 3.5 hours to reach Phakding.
Hello.
We had company throughout the trek. The trail to Phakding was easier than we thought. We reached Phakding too early, so we decided to have dal bhat before trekking toward Monjo. That is Dorje, taking a nap. We took a rest for a while after our lunch and headed towards Monjo. We trekked alongside the Dingboche river, and as we left Phakding, we could see hotels that were beautifully built throughout the trail. There are multiple intersections throughout the trail. In these situations, we simply ask the locals in the nearby hotels for directions. After walking for about 2.5 hours, we arrived at Monjo. We stayed in the Hotel Kailash. The hotel owners were very generous and attentive to customers' needs. We would like to give you a quick tour of the accommodation that you can expect when you are at an altitude of 2,835 meters. The hotel had hot showers, the rooms were comfy, and had a sunset view of Mount Thamserku. This hotel was massive and completely made of wood. One of the perks of traveling in peak winter time in Nepal is having little to no crowd and good hotels at a cheap price. As the sky dusked, we ended our day with a beautiful sunset view over Mount Thamserku. Today is the day we enter the Sagarmatha National Park, the protected mountainous region. There was also a group of monks heading toward Namche. This house is supposedly one of the oldest houses in Phakding. Purvadai assisted us in our journey to Namche Bazaar. There is a miniature structure of the Everest National Park at the entrance. This is also the place where armies will inquire for permits, drones, and personal information and provide you with a ticket to enter the national park. There are carved walls like these throughout the trek, and we were told that people don't carve like this anymore. Along the way, you will get to observe two bridges named after the first two people that stepped foot on the peak of Mount Everest. The Edmund Hillary Bridge is an old route to Namche, and above it is another bridge named after the legendary Tenzing Norgay, which is the easier and latest route to Namche. Monjo to Namche is an uphill walk and can be tougher for some, but thanks to Purvadai, he made the uphill walk feel so easy with his jokes and stories. After you cross the Tenzing Bridge, you arrive at Topdara. There are a few restrooms and water taps in case you need a break. Once you cross Topdara, you will come across a clearer and closer view of Kongdiri. Don't worry, there will be an even better view of it once you are at Namche. There are a few junctions where you might get confused, but there are always tea houses nearby to ask for directions. Namche Reveal is seriously one of the most dramatic things in the trek, as the settlement is behind a blind turn. The way the civilization is built looks and feels surreal. It is like a huge football stadium where mountains and vegetation are the viewers and we are the spectacle. Due to COVID and the lack of tourist flow, most of the hotels were closed. Pharmacy, ATMs, and a few shops were in service, but except for that, human interaction was non-existent. We had arrived just 2 days before Sonam Losar. This is one of the biggest festivals for people living in the Himalayan region of Nepal. We stayed at a hotel in the topmost area of Namche and the view was insane. Upon our arrival at our hotel, we got to see a whole lot of new mountains that surrounded this big and beautiful community. Kongderi, Kusumkangru, and the whole body of Mount Thamserku are the most visible and noticeable peaks But a quick view of Mount Amadablam is also seen from Namche, but more on that later. We also met Mr. Angkami Sherpa. He is 83 years old. He talked about his life, explained how Namche was when he was young, and spoke to us through all his adventures. When he was 12, he worked as a porter and traversed with Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. With age and everything that comes with it, he nowadays spends his time in peace in the place where he was born and bred. It was a gloomy day, a good time to stay cozy, play cards, and of course, admire the beauty of Namche with a hot cup of tea and dear friends on the balcony.
Legend.
Zenzuktai had a little acoustic session for us as we ended our amazing day. The next morning started with a rush. We had planned a sunrise photo shoot, but we overslept. Nevertheless, we were able to get the pictures and time lapses we desired. We also had our first sight of Mount Amadablam this morning. It was very tiny and far away, but good enough to keep us excited for what was to come. Every other morning, every other day, this trek made us realize just how little we have seen in our life. The no crowd and emptiness that was in the Everest region because of COVID and winter made the trek even more intimate. Everywhere we were traversing, we had everything for ourselves. No hassle, no competition, no negotiations. All of those things that we were trying to get away from Kathmandu. Since today was our acclimatization day, we had nothing to rush about. Acclimatization day is a day separated to adapt yourself to the altitude. This is not necessary for everyone, but since we were traveling in the winter season, we did not want to take any chances. The idea of an acclimatization day is not to stay at the hotel all day, but instead gain a higher height somewhere near the surroundings, which will make the sleep for the night comfortable and walk for tomorrow easier. Our plan for today was to go to the Everest View Hotel, which is also considered one of the hotels located at the highest altitude in the world. Lily guided us to our destination. Everest Region as a trekking destination is still upgrading. Although the hotels and infrastructures are far better here than in other treks we have been to, there are new constant upgrades taking place for a better travel experience. The closer you get to the hotel, the mountains appear in a string like some kind of garland made out of flowers. This was the first time we saw Everest in person, tightly surrounded by Nupche and Lhotse as seen from here. There are helipads in multiple places for possible rescue reasons, for helicopter tours, and to bring resources from Kathmandu. After about 2 hours, we reached the Everest View Hotel. The hotel felt premium. It just makes you question how they built all this at this kind of altitude. The hotel was empty due to COVID. We were able to get very good balcony seats for ourselves for the pictures and videos. It is situated at 13,000 feet, with breathtaking views of Everest, Nupche, Lhotse, Tengboche, Amadavlam in front, Thamserku in the right, and Kongderi at the back. This was what we were craving: absolute silence, nothing but the gushing wind and birds chirping. There is also a museum you can add to your acclimatization day list. We were aware of the Sonam Losar that was happening in the Everest region, and that was tomorrow. The hotel owners were preparing khapse for the occasion. Khapse is one of the delicacies of the Himalayan region in Nepal, probably influenced by Tibetan culture. Everyone seemed very excited, but at the same time, the community was aware of the death of one of the senior Rinpoche of Tengboche monastery. This meant they could not celebrate the festival to its full potential as they had to pay their respects to the Rinpoche. By the way, the Tengboche monastery is the biggest in the Everest region. It looks like a grand forbidden palace, which we'll talk more about once we get there. As it was the day of Losar, the entire atmosphere was very generous and giving around Namche. The hotel felt like a house. The house had a herb like smell. It was completely decorated, and there was religious background music all over the place. Various ceremonies were happening all over the community. Everyone was dressed in their native clothes. The next morning, we had one of the most authentic breakfasts. Before leaving our hotel, we had a small photo shoot. The hotel owners packed us a light lunch for free with khapse and chocolates. It was very generous of them. Our next stop is Tengboche. From our experience, this was the most difficult day of walking in our entire trek. Probably because we walked for 6 to 7 hours without lunch that day. We had chocolates and junk food here and there, but not having dal bhat was probably what made the day of walk extraordinary. There is Kangjuma and 2 more small settlements before the checkpost. We suggest you have lunch here. As gruesome as the trek felt this day, we got to see Kangtega Peak as our new exploration achievement. The peak looked like an ice cream on a cone.
Gokyo, Everest Basecamp.
The winds in the bridges get stronger as you start gaining altitude. After the army post, there are no hotels to have lunch in. The walk from Namche to Tengboche for the first hour is mostly downhill, but after the army checkpoint, it is all uphill. After 6 to 7 hours of walking, we reached Tengboche. The place was deserted. Not a single human was to be seen, but there were a lot of dogs, which meant there were people also. We knocked on the doors of all the hotels, and much to our relief, one of them was open. The hotel was named Tashi Delik. This hotel specifically was on top of the hill, so it felt colder at times, but the view from the room makes it worth it. The hotel owners made sure we were kept warm as soon as we arrived. We also had a friendly conversation with the hotel owner. He mentioned his son was a monk and casually explained how he had climbed Everest 3 times while poaching eggs for us simultaneously. The weather surprisingly got better after an hour or so. We changed our clothes, took a rest for a while, and did not waste any time and started exploring the Tengboche monastery. The gates of the monastery were beautifully crafted. According to the rules, pictures and videos are not allowed inside the monastery. So you will have to be there to experience the vibe of the place. There was a big ceremony being held inside the monastery. We were not sure if it was for the Losar or the death of the Rinpoche. We attended the ceremony before finally heading toward our hotel. The accommodation was more than we could have asked for at this kind of altitude. The rooms in Tengboche felt colder, probably because the hotel was in a windy spot, so we had to layer up our clothes. As the hotel was empty, the owner of hotel made sure we had the best rooms. Nothing about the room felt comforting at night as it was freezing cold, but only in the morning we realized why the room was rated so high. We had a short photo session before breakfast.
Three times Everest. Kada.
Before leaving the hotel, the owner explained how the trail was for the day and gave us the contacts of his relative in Dingboche, our next destination. The dogs were very happy to see us. It immediately felt like they had seen new people after a very long time. They roll around on the snow when they feel hot. They eat snow when they are thirsty. They are just goofy like that and plenty of fun to trek along with. COVID or winter, the locals were going through their regular chores with their animals herding and traveling to their relative on foot for personal reasons. This trail was the easiest in the entire trek. The only noticeable uphill walk was the last hour before you reached the settlement of Dingboche, except that the trail was very comfortable. The next settlement you will come across is Pangboche, which is located around 3,985 meters. We were not very hungry when we reached Pangboche, so we decided to eat our lunch in the next settlement. After Pangboche, there is one more location with few hotels, but everything was closed when we arrived there. Hence, another day without dal bhat. But the trail was easy comparatively, so we did not have much trouble. One thing you should keep in mind is that it gets very windy after Pangboche. Make sure your head and chest are covered properly. There is a lodge in Osho, but it was also closed when we arrived here. You'll see a signboard in Osho denoting the directions towards Feriche or Dingboche. That is where the uphill walk toward Dingboche starts. This bit was the only difficult climb this day. We finally reached Dingboche, the last Sherpa village of the Everest Base Camp trek. Once we reached Dingboche, we had a clear view of Mount Tengboche. There are plenty of hotels in Dingboche. Imjatse, also known as Island Peak and Peak 38, are some new peaks you will observe upon arrival in Dingboche. Meanwhile, a closer look at Ama Dablam Lotsesar and Tengboche can be observed while staying in this peaceful haven. We had never seen Ama Dablam up so close. We were resting on its lap. Our first impression of Dingboche was how non-windy and warm the place was compared to Tengboche. We reached Dingboche very early. We had planned to hike to a peak nearby tomorrow, so we rested today instead. The sunset over Imjatse, Ama Dablam, Lhotse and Everest Peak looked insane. The landscape is such in the mountains, the poetries and words of appreciation just seem to come out even without trying. Today we were supposed to hike toward Nang Kartsang Peak, but we were very exhausted and the weather in Dingboche was so warm and comforting that we decided we would rather play pool and stroll around the settlement to get some pictures and videos. You also have the option to hike toward the Everest Base Camp. You can consult with the locals about the time and direction for these short hikes. We strongly suggest you hike towards Nang Kartsang Peak for the insane panoramic view it offers and, of course, for your body to adapt to higher altitudes to come.
Last is so bad as it. Monjo.
We were recommended by the hotel owner to leave the hotel early in the morning to avoid the heavy wind. It will get very windy as the day goes by. We waved goodbye to the last Sherpa village of the Everest trek and headed towards Lobuche. Our next stop was Lobuche, but before that, we had to climb the gruesome uphill hike of the Lukla viewpoint.
Lobuche, baby.
The beauty of Mount Cholatse left us stunned. We were blown away by how close we were to the mountains. We could see the base and peak of an entire mountain. The trail for an hour was very easygoing. As we were enjoying our trek, we couldn't help but notice that we had been walking for more than 2 hours and still had not reached Tukla's settlement. The further steps we took, the realization was getting stronger that we had lost our way. This was the first occasion in this trek where we had derailed from the trail because there were no signboards on the trail.
यहाँ चाहिँ थुप्रो ट्रेलहरू रहेछ हैन अनि दिङबोचेबाट लोबुचे जाँदा हामी चाहिँ हरायौँ 1 घन्टा जति यो माथि टपबाट यस्तो ग्रिन छत भएको ठाउँ देख्यो भने चाहिँ ठुक्ला हो भने थाहा पाउने हैन सिधै यो घरतिर आउनु अरु कतै नगयो हुन्छ हामी चाहिँ घरतिर नआए अर्कै ट्रेल गयौँ 1 घन्टा बेकारमा चढ्नु पर्यो कति धेरै ट्रेलहरू रहेछ क्या झुकियो क्या अनि
After 45 minutes of the uphill climb, we were finally at Lukla. It gets very windy as you keep gaining height. There were instances where we had to find shelter behind boulders to catch breaks from heavy wind. This viewpoint was otherworldly. The view from here was a sight to behold. We had never seen anything like it ever before. There were just so many pointy mountains in front of us, we couldn't fathom it. What we were seeing was something new and exciting and raised our expectations for what was to come before the Everest Base Camp. New peaks like Mount Pumori, Lingtren and Mount Khumbuntse appeared while heading towards Lobuche. By the way, if any random dog while trekking anywhere in Nepal starts following you, just remember that now you are following them. Because 4 out of 5 times the dog that seems lost has traveled through these parts of the terrain more times with other strangers than you can imagine. It took us about 6 hours to reach Lobuche, accounting for the time we lost. There were only 2 hotels open. We stayed at the Hotel Alpine. After an exhausting day, we were resting at the fireplace in the common room and suddenly it started snowing. We wasted no time and left the fireplace and went out of the hotel to soak in the beauty of Lobuche during snowfall. It was the very first snow shower experience for one of our friends. I think you can tell which friend.
भुइँमा पल्टिदिउँ भुइँमा लिदिउँ
ल ल हर्स हर्स आयो घोडा आयो सेतो घोडा अर्को घोडा नि आयो
The horse's name is Maila. As you can see, Maila is not too keen on sharing the food that was meant for him. Today was an exciting day full of new experiences. We were happy with how the day turned out and hoping for the same next day. The hotel owners made our stay in Lobuche as comfortable as possible, and we will always be grateful for that. Today is the day we traversed toward the Everest Base Camp. The weather was so pleasant after the previous night's snow shower. Not a single cloud. Out of all, Mount Pumori stood out the most. Although it snowed yesterday, it was comfortable enough to walk on, but carrying crampons wouldn't hurt. As we started marching towards Gorakshep, the last settlement of the Everest Base Camp trek, we also saw Mount Changse. The trail from Lobuche to Gorakshep is not difficult as there are no steep upward walks, but at certain points there are no distinct trails and we were just walking on landslide debris. Thankfully, Suraj Dai knew the trail very well. We just decided to follow him.
हामी चाहिँ अहिले गोरखसेप गइरहेको गोरखसेप चाहिँ एभरेस्ट बेस क्याम्प पुग्नुभन्दा भेरी लास्ट स्टप हो त्यो चाहिँ गोरखसेप पछि सिधै एभरेस्ट बेस क्याम्प हो अनि यो ठाउँ चाहिँ एक्ज्याक्टली यो ठाउँ चाहिँ यहाँ चाहिँ एन्सेलको टावर टिप्छ अरे सो गोरखसेप जाँदा जाँदै बिचमा घरमा फोन गर्नुपर्छ अरे ठ्याक्क गर्दा हुन्छ यहाँ चाहिँ टावर टिप्छ अरे
After 3 hours of walking, we were at the last settlement of the trek. Gorakshep was undoubtedly one of the most hardcore settlements. It was so close to some of the biggest mountains in the world. We were at the end of Nepal, as you could see the mountains of Tibet, and the hotels were so close to the glaciers. It was just an insane experience. The hotel owner explained to us that this giant boulder resembled the peak of Everest, so instead of destroying the figure, they just built the hotel around it. By the way, we stayed at the Buddha Lodge and restaurant. We then straightly walked towards the base camp the same day after having our lunch. There is a very good chance of getting lost while heading towards the base camp as there were no signboards. You start seeing shiny material on the ground on which you will be walking. After this point, you just start walking on glaciers. As you get closer to the base camp, the peak of Everest starts disappearing. As surprising as this might sound, you cannot observe Everest from the base camp. Kala Pathar is the best viewpoint to observe Everest at its full scale. We were finally at the Everest Base Camp. We were overjoyed with what we had achieved. Maybe it was all the adrenaline running through our bodies, but the temperature in the Everest Base Camp felt warmer. We were climbing rocks and running like kids, taking photographs in one of the most iconic places on Earth. After enjoying the breathtaking view of the Himalayas up close, we returned to our hotel. By the way, we again lost our way while returning from the base camp. Thanks to Suraj Dai, we were able to navigate in the right direction again with his assistance. Lost or found, we were very exhilarated with what we had experienced and seen from the crack of dawn. The sunset view of Namche right before our eyes was the icing on the cake moment for us. We were very exhausted. We planned to trek up to Kala Pathar in the morning for the sunrise view, but boy, we were so very cocky with our ambitions. It was so cold we did not want to leave our beds. Although we did wake up before sunrise, we all instead listened to a few songs and took another nap until sunrise. Any excuse to not leave that warm bed. All the water was frozen, and when we woke up in the morning, the temperature was minus 20 degrees Celsius. We used 2 to 3 layers of blankets for each person for the night. Surprisingly, it still felt more comfortable than in Lobuche for some reason. The next morning, our plan was to trek from Gorakshep to Dingboche. It was a beautiful morning. We had a heavy breakfast at Gorakshep with a light lunch at Lobuche, aiming to have dal bhat at Dingboche. But it was not meant to be. As you can see, signboards were forced away from their natural positions due to heavy wind and snowfall. This was a normal occurrence when we were trekking in these parts. Until Thukla, the hike was easy. It was mostly downhill. It was sunny and the trail was familiar. After Thukla, we derailed again. We were convinced that we had lost our way again once the sun started setting and the wind got heavier with no sight of Dingboche. We had walked way past our estimated time and there was no settlement to be seen. We had no idea where we were headed. All we knew was we had to get as close as possible to Ama Dablam, as according to our understanding that is where Dingboche is. After walking aimlessly for a few hours, the wind was becoming unbearable to the point where we were being pushed away by the howling wind. Much to our relief, after a certain point we saw a small settlement. So we started descending from the top of the hill like mountain goats. At that time, it was the only logical decision we could come up with. The wind speed was getting aggressively louder to the point where we could not hear ourselves talking. By the sound we have captured, you can imagine how windy it can get sometimes. All we could do was laugh at ourselves as we had lost our trail again in such a fashion.
Dingboche जान लाग्यो एउटा बाटो एउटा ट्रेल मिस भयो दिङबोच जाने ठाउँमा हामी चाहिँ फेरि चाहिँ आएछौँ है फेरि चाहिँ आएछौँ हामी चाहिँ फेरि चाहिँ नबस्ने भयौँ भनौँ एउटा गाइड दाइ भेटियो हैन गाइड दाइ चाहिँ नाम्चे जान लाग्यो अरे नाम्चे जान चाहिँ अझै 6-7 आवर्स लाग्छ अरे राति 9-10 बजे पुग्छ अरे त्यसैले अब हामी चाहिँ पाङबोचे बस्छौँ पाङबोचे चाहिँ 1 hour 1.5 hour पुग्छ अरे भात पनि खाएको छैन हामीले त्यसैले नाम्चे आज अलि सक्दिनँ फेरि चाहिँ नबस्ने भयौँ पाङबोचे बस्ने आज भोलि सजिलो हुन्छ त्यो ट्रेल चाहिँ खतम रहेछ यहाँ
We were finally at Pangboche, extremely exhausted. As it started snowing heavily and it was getting darker, we were more than happy to spend our night in Pangboche.
Hi! Hi guys, we are in here! How are you here?
After a snowy night, Pangboche was oozing with beauty. We also saw how the animals lived in harmony with the locals. The yaks, donkeys, horses, and dogs provided their services in exchange for food and care. The beauty of the Everest region was just hitting differently after the snowfall. Our goal for the day was to reach Lukla and catch our flight the next day to Kathmandu early morning. This trail was probably our favorite of the trek. The snowfall had enhanced the already beautiful Everest region. There was this feeling of calmness in us today. Visually, it was very pleasing, and this is what we travel for. We will keep the narration to a minimum for a few minutes. We want you to enjoy the trail and its beauty as we did. When we arrived at Tengboche, it felt like we had just visited through the gates of heaven. As a group of people looking for new experiences, the scenery from Tengboche was more than what we could have asked for. We had our lunch at Namche. While returning to Phakding, the weather changed suddenly. We met Furvadai at Namche and decided to stay at Phakding at his hotel rather than move to Lukla. We also discovered some of our friends are not as good at playing pool.
एयरपोर्टमा मजाले हान्ने सिफ्टी हान्ने होइन
अहिले नलगाउने यो चिसो छ त है
आइदिनुहोस् मलाई एकछिन कहीँबाट आएको त हुँदैन
This trip was an experience of a lifetime. Lukla is just 20 minutes away from Kathmandu. If you're looking for a sign to travel to the Everest region, this is it. We will always be grateful to the people of the Everest region for their hospitality. We felt right at home. Thanks Thanks to Furva Dai and Zenzub Dai for keeping us company throughout Lukla to Namche. Special thanks to Chedan Didi for her warmth and love. Indebted to Sangden Dai and Sanjeev Dai for their affection and warmth. We will be back with greater enthusiasm as Gokyo awaits.